Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 53 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk about NFL free agency and all the recent moves, trades, extensions, etc. that have happened over the past couple of days and their impact on Dynasty fantasy football. So before we get into that though, just want to remind everyone, as always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We are on everything out there, so whether you're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. Go make sure you're following so you don't miss any future episodes. Go find us on Twitter or X at Dynasty War Room, and go subscribe on YouTube at Dynasty War Room. And so like I said, today's show, entirely on free agency and some of the moves that have happened over the past few days or so. A lot of fantasy relevant moves and a lot of trades as well that have had an impact on the Dynasty landscape. So with all that being said, let's jump on into today's show, and we're going to kick things off with quarterback moves. So I have rounded up all of the quarterback related moves, whether it's trades, free agent signings, extensions, and so we're going to talk about them position by position. And let's start things off with a big trade that went down over the weekend involving Geno Smith. So the Seattle Seahawks traded Geno Smith to the Vegas Raiders, and it was just for a third-round pick, and it represented a pretty bold shift in Seattle's thinking to move on from Geno, send him off to the Raiders. And on the surface, when it first happened, I liked the move for both sides. I think for Vegas, the move makes a ton of sense. You know, you're looking to have some sort of established veteran quarterback when you had none on the roster. Pete Carroll is there. There's some familiarity, of course. And with the number 6 pick, you weren't guaranteed to be able to draft Cam Ward. You know, the jury is out on Shedeur Sanders in terms of where exactly he falls in terms of an NFL prospect. So if the Raiders were not comfortable with drafting Sanders or making a big trade to go up for Cam Ward, this made a lot of sense. You know, the free agent market at the position is not all that great, and Geno Smith is a stable, steady veteran. I don't think that Geno Smith is a great quarterback. I'm not sure that he would even qualify as good, but I think he's average, and average is significantly better than what the Raiders had these past couple of seasons. So from that sense, this is great news for Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, the rest of those offensive weapons in Las Vegas. They could be adding Ashton Genty. They have the 6th overall pick. That certainly could be a possibility. And all of a sudden, this offense could look a lot different, much improved. Now, still lots of questions about the team as a whole. They play in a very tough division. But on the surface, it seems like Geno Smith going to the Raiders makes a ton of sense for Vegas. Now, on the Seattle side, that's where things are a little bit more interesting because obviously moving on from your starting quarterback for just a third-round pick felt a little bit underwhelming. However, at the same time, I think it's good process by Seattle in recognizing that Geno Smith is not a Super Bowl level quarterback. You were not going to win the Super Bowl with Geno Smith as your team's quarterback. They weren't going to go anywhere in terms of, you know, a deep playoff run with Geno. This was a, you know, borderline playoff team. It's a wild card level team. They just missed out, but it's, you know, 10-7, they're a 9-8, 10-7 type of team, and Geno Smith was not someone that was going to take them to the next level. So from that perspective, I don't mind the move of moving on from Geno Smith because I think it's important that teams realize you either have a Super Bowl level guy or you don't, and if you don't, you just should move on and try out another rookie, see what you can make happen in the trade market, free agency, etc. And that's what Seattle did, is they turned their attention to Sam Darnold, who is going to be the second player that comes up here. And they signed Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $100.5 million contract, and that was their Geno Smith replacement. I'm not that convinced that Sam Darnold is significantly better than Geno Smith. I think at best it's a mild upgrade, but Sam Darnold does not do well under pressure. Seattle has a very poor offensive line. So from that perspective, I just don't know that it's really that big of an improvement for a team that, you know, maybe didn't have a lot of great options, which of course signals, well, maybe you hold on to Geno for one more year and then figure this out next year with a much better, rookie quarterback class and figure out what the free agent market looks like then. But, the Seahawks did not want to wait that long. So here they are. They liked what they saw from Darnold, who gets a nice little payday. He basically gets the Baker Mayfield contract, and he's going to be the starter for the next couple of seasons. So we'll see what he can do with Seattle. They made a lot of other big moves on that offense, including shipping off DK Metcalf, who we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But all in all, it feels like a wash for Seattle. I don't know that they necessarily got better. And for fantasy football purposes, I think Darnold will be okay. I don't think he's going to be as good as he was with Minnesota. I think he can give you Geno Smith type numbers, which, we were already used to having that. I wouldn't picture this as some big upgrade for the weapons in Seattle. In fact, most of all, this probably helps the running game with Kenneth Walker, who I think is probably going to be leaned on a little bit more. JSN, of course, without having DK, should have a nice big season, but all in all, just a little bit underwhelming with Seattle. I liked the move with Geno, which maybe was a bit of a hot take, but I don't love the idea of going with Sam Darnold on a 3-year contract. I would have preferred maybe a shorter bridge QB on just a 1-year deal if possible, even 2 years. But, the quarterback market is always a tough one, and you're going to have to pay up. And that leads us to quarterback number 3 that I want to talk about, and that's Justin Fields, who signed with the New York Jets on a 2-year, $40 million contract, and he's going to be the starter. Justin Fields will be the starting quarterback for at least this season with New York. That's why he signed there. He got a pretty sizable amount of guaranteed money. 30 out of that $40 million is guaranteed, and he didn't return to Pittsburgh because they couldn't guarantee him the starting job. So New York was willing to do that. Again, similar to Vegas, where, they're late enough in the draft where you're not going to get Cam Ward without making a huge trade. Maybe don't love Shadur Sanders. This makes some sense. Again, Aaron Rodgers, colossal bust. The rest of the free agent market, trade market at the QB, not all that great. So I think Justin Fields represents a high ceiling. There is some upside here. Obviously, this could explode and be a disaster, but given the other options between Geno and Darnold and, Rodgers, Russell Wilson, etc., I think that Justin Fields is probably one of the best options for a team to take a shot on, and getting him for just 2 years, I think is a nice situation for both parties. It gives Fields a chance to prove himself. We've seen him be a very good fantasy football player. So from that sense, I think this is really, really good news for Justin Fields managers. There is some familiarity there with Garrett Wilson, of course, both of them having gone to Ohio State. I don't know exactly what this does for the offense as a whole. I don't know that it significantly helps anyone. In fact, it probably hurts Garrett Wilson, and it's neutral at best probably for Breece Hall as long as he stays healthy. But again, it's just one of those things where if Justin Fields can establish himself as at least an average passer, he could be a great quarterback. But we just haven't seen him. We haven't seen him be able to do that yet in the NFL. Next up, we have Kenny Pickett, who got traded from Philly to the Cleveland Browns for Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a 5th-round pick. Nothing crazy with this trade here. I don't know that Pickett is going to start any games for the Browns, but I think it's just an upgraded backup situation there. Jameis Winston's a free agent, and the Browns obviously like Pickett more than DTR. With the 2nd overall pick, you could certainly see Shadur Sanders in the mix, Cam Ward if he doesn't go number 1, but we'll see. I think this still is a good landing spot for a Kirk Cousins if he does end up being traded. At the moment, it does not look like Kirk Cousins is on the trade block. The Falcons have said that they would prefer to hold on to him. They don't want to move him. They like him as a backup to Michael Penix Jr., so that's another quarterback to keep an eye on. But as of right now, no movement there. And, Pickett, again, small-time trade. Next up, we got a couple of, veteran quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford re-signed with the Rams. There was a bit of a circus there with, was he going to go to the Giants? Was he going to move on to the Raiders? Ends up back with the Rams. So that's obviously great news for Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, the new receiver there, signing a 2-year contract, who we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And but Stafford staying with the Rams. Another guy staying with his team for the long haul, Josh Allen got a 6-year, $330 million extension with over $250 million fully guaranteed. So I believe that is a record there in the guaranteed money. So nice contract extension for him. He's going to stay in Buffalo for the rest of his career. Some other veteran guys out there, veterans now at this point. Zach Wilson went to the Dolphins on a 1-year deal to back up there. Jarrett Stidham stays in Denver, where he's going to back up Bo Nix. And then we got a bunch of guys that we don't know yet where they're going to go. So we're recording this podcast at around 8 o'clock Eastern on Monday, March 10th. So later in the day here on the opening day of NFL tampering or free agency. And we do not know where Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson or Daniel Jones are going to be playing football next year. So there are a lot of rumblings that it could be the Steelers or the Giants for Aaron Rodgers. Whichever team misses out on Aaron Rodgers could go the Russell Wilson route. It sounds like the Steelers might be the more desirable place to be of those two locations, but it just remains to be seen whether or not the team and the player, whether there's a match there in terms of do the Steelers want Wilson back? Do they want Rodgers? Not exactly an awesome situation in terms of either quarterback. Both, struggled a lot, but obviously veterans, and with DK Metcalf and George Pickens, there's finally some receivers there to throw the ball to. So we'll see what happens with Pittsburgh. But I think, at least for Aaron Rodgers, the Steelers are probably the best possible landing spot. So if he does end up there, I think that's a pretty good spot for him. If you're holding on to him in Dynasty, is trying to get one more year out of him as a decent QB2 or QB3 option in terms of somebody to start on bye weeks. Same with Russell Wilson. I think staying with the Steelers is probably his best option as well. He had an okay season last year, was a serviceable QB2, and I think he could do that again, especially having DK Metcalf. And of course, there's some familiarity there from their time in Seattle. But the New York Giants wouldn't necessarily be the worst spot either. There is Malik Neighbors, so obviously a young star wide receiver to have there. Can't go wrong. But to me, the Steelers are the more ideal place for these veterans. For Daniel Jones, it looks like we're talking about the Colts or the Vikings are the two teams that have been seen as the most likely landing spots for Daniel Jones. Obviously, he would have the chance to battle with Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis and, try to hold off J.J. McCarthy in Minnesota. I think taking the job from Anthony Richardson is a much more likely scenario than taking that job from J.J. McCarthy. So I wouldn't be shocked if he were to go to the Colts. But the Vikings are a nice, cushy spot. There's nothing wrong with being a high-level backup in the NFL, and Daniel Jones could get a nice contract, stay in Minnesota where he finished the year last year. There's some familiarity, of course, now with the offense. And J.J. McCarthy is returning from an injury. So, there could be some time at the beginning of the season where Daniel Jones could start a few games. Obviously, he's not going to hold on to that for the entire year. But look what just happened with Sam Darnold. If he plays well, who knows what could happen. He could end up with another contract or, it's kind of a wild card situation. So we'll see what happens there. But that's the scoop on the quarterback market right now. So the Geno Smith, Justin Fields situation, Sam Darnold, probably the biggest moves at the position, and we're waiting for those last few dominoes to fall. Moving over to running backs, not as much news here at the position. However, we did get some good news in terms of extensions, and let's start with the big one that happened a week and a half ago or so. Saquon Barkley signed with the Philadelphia Eagles in an extension, and got a nice big 2 years, $41.2 million contract, highest paid running back in football, and very well deserved. He was awesome for fantasy football, awesome for the NFL. Everything about him was great, and he's in a good situation. Got a nice offensive line, obviously just won the Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts, very stable at QB. So pretty awesome situation for Saquon Barkley. And even though he's starting to get up there in age in terms of running back age, this extension should make fantasy managers feel pretty good about the next 2 to 3 years with the Eagles. And I think it puts him squarely in the mix in terms of dynasty running back 3 or 4. I think the consensus is that post-rookie drafts, Saquon will be the number 4 dynasty running back behind Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and then Ashton Genty. And I think that's a really good spot to be. And the fact that you have a 28 years old now, 28-year-old running back that can be a top 5 dynasty asset at the position is incredible. It just shows you just how talented he truly is. And great news for everybody that he gets that 2-year extension. Another guy that got a 2-year extension is Aaron Jones with the Minnesota Vikings. He got a 2-year, $20 million contract, $13 million of which was fully guaranteed, which is a pretty sizable deal for Aaron Jones, who just turned 30. And I think this should give you some confidence that he will be the full-time starter again in 2025 with Minnesota. They don't have a ton of draft picks. They were always a possibility, a team that could very well be eyeing a running back in the draft, but they only have 3 picks. So it wasn't a situation where they necessarily were going to be forced into taking a running back. They didn't want to necessarily have to burn a pick at that position. And so Aaron Jones, 2 years, nice flexibility there for both sides. And I think he's a really nice veteran buy low because you can get him for pretty dirt cheap right now. And now with this extension, the price is going to be rising. But if you're looking for somebody that you want on a 1-year, 2-year basis for a late second-round pick or something like that, I think a second-round pick would definitely get that deal done. So depending on the type of team that has Aaron Jones, of course, if it's a contender, probably not moving him anymore now that they know he's staying with the Vikings. So you might have missed the boat, but still, if you are a Jones manager, you should feel very happy that he is staying in Minnesota. Probably the big free agent news of the day at the position was Javonte Williams signing with the Dallas Cowboys. He got a pretty small deal, 1-year, $3 million contract. It's more indicative that maybe he's going to be a backup or be in some sort of timeshare there with Dallas. And, that's number 2 running back money to me. And but even still, being the number 2 running back in Dallas is a nice spot to be. So I think it's an improved situation for him compared to Denver, where he was splitting the load with, 17 other guys. And now it's going to be essentially just him and whatever rookie Dallas drafts at some point in the NFL draft. I don't know that they're going to be an Ashton Genty landing spot. It doesn't seem like Dallas wants to commit that type of money and draft capital to a running back, given the way that things sort of ended with Zeke Elliott. However, I think that Javonte Williams, this is a nice little buy low opportunity for someone that could see, a little bit of a resurgence here in 2025. Some other smaller time running back signings just to keep note of in terms of having backups or depth guys on your bench. Samaje Perine signed with Cincinnati on a 2-year deal worth only $3.8 million. Not with the Bucs for a 3-year, $22 million. That was an erroneous report. Pretty funny story there. The Bucs GM on Twitter came out and just denied having made that signing after there was a false report. But Perine to Cincinnati, I think, makes a ton of sense. Probably for both sides. And I think the big winner from this is probably Chase Brown, because there is certainly still the possibility that Cincinnati drafts a running back. In fact, I would fully expect them to. But having Perine maybe leads me to think that they are okay with taking somebody on day 3 and not using a 2nd or 3rd round pick at the position, which would be much more detrimental to Chase Brown's value. So having Perine to fill in the gap there, I think, as a backup is a really good sign for Chase Brown and a solid move for both parties. Another backup, Elijah Mitchell, is moving on from San Francisco, heading over to Kansas City, while Patrick Taylor stays with the 49ers. So a couple backups there. Elijah Mitchell is an interesting name. I don't know that he's going to get a ton of work, but again, could give you a little bit of confidence in Isaiah Pacheco, given the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs could easily draft a running back, but if they still have Pacheco, they signed Elijah Mitchell, there's Kareem Hunt, maybe there's a little bit less pressure to go out and acquire a high-level running back in the draft. But still a little bit worried about Pacheco, but again, that's where this Mitchell signing is a bit notable. The last name I want to talk about at running back is going to be Najee Harris, who just as we started to record, the reports were that the Los Angeles Chargers were very interested and close to getting a deal done with Najee Harris. So this is both good and bad news. I think for Najee Harris, this is great news. This is the best possible situation for Najee Harris. Going to the Chargers, Jim Harbaugh offense that loves to run the ball. They clearly need a running back. They moved on from Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins is a free agent. So Najee Harris would walk in and be the clear-cut number one player in L.A. Now, from a rookie standpoint, it's not so great because the Chargers at pick 22 are seen as one of those landing spots for a potential first-round running back, potentially an Amarian Hampton, Travion Henderson, something along those lines. And they still very, very much could draft one of those players, assuming they do go through and sign Najee Harris. But I think it makes the possibility a little bit less likely. I think you're probably looking more at a third-round pick or so, if they were to sign Harris. But he's somebody, a big bruising back. He fits into that system. He can catch the ball. And he got a lot of wear and tear with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But depending on that contract, it'll be really interesting to see how things shake out. But certainly a pretty good landing spot for him if that does come to fruition if you are a Najee Harris manager. All right, so let's move on over to the wide receiver position where we have a few big signings along with some trades. And let's kick things off with Davante Adams, who we mentioned earlier. He signed a 2-year, $44 million deal with the Rams, and he's essentially just taking the Cooper Kupp job. So he's going to be there with Puka. Stafford is re-signed, and I think it makes a ton of sense. This is another move that I think, the money is solid. $44 million over 2 years. That's a sizable contract, but Davante Adams still seems to have it. Has some gas left in the tank. He had a really nice season with the Jets last year with Aaron Rodgers. This time he moves out to the West Coast back to California without Rodgers and gets an upgrade at quarterback with Matthew Stafford. So a really nice situation. And if you were worried about Davante Adams just sort of losing all fantasy value with Aaron Rodgers not being in the picture or him being across the age 30 margin at this point, I don't think you have to worry. I think that at least for this year, you got one more year of really good production out of Davante Adams. Definitely a startable player in Dynasty. So a nice situation for everybody involved. DK Metcalf, the other big name that we mentioned that was traded from Seattle to Pittsburgh, he then got a 5-year, $150 million deal. So a huge, huge extension with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And obviously that's a ton of money, big commitment, but we had known that Pittsburgh was desperate for an upgrade at wide receiver for months. I mean, every single receiver that hit the market, the one team that was always involved was Pittsburgh. So they finally got their guy. They gave up a second-round pick to Seattle to get it done. And from Seattle's perspective, again, it looks like they're trying to get younger, just retool the offense, probably change into more of a true power run offense with Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. They moved on from their OC, moved on from their quarterback, traded DK Metcalf. So it's really been a big shift on the offense in Seattle. And Pittsburgh is a team that desperately needed another receiver other than George Pickens. It's a pretty funny combo as Metcalf and Pickens are similar players, big deep threat targets. And the quarterbacks that they're looking at between Rodgers and Wilson are guys that can get the ball downfield. So could be a nice, fun pairing for fantasy football if everything works out. But I'm a bit skeptical. Arthur Smith is there. He doesn't run a great offense, and especially not for fantasy football. So we'll see how things shake out. Great for DK Metcalf in terms of money and his personal situation. Maybe not the best landing spot in terms of Dynasty and DK Metcalf's overall fantasy outlook. I don't know that you can expect better production than what he had in Seattle. I think you're probably looking at, mid to low end wide receiver 2 numbers from here on out for DK Metcalf, which is fine, but that would feel like a pretty solid disappointment for Pittsburgh given what they just paid. Chris Godwin re-signed, one of the first players that was announced at the start of free agency today. He re-signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on a 3-year, $66 million deal. There's a lot of incentives in that contract to boost that number up as well. And reports are that he turned down a lot more money from the Patriots to stay with Tampa Bay. So it's a great situation. He showed a lot of good chemistry with Baker Mayfield. We saw that this season where he was just an elite wide receiver, one of the best in all of fantasy football, best in the NFL while he was healthy this year. And then he got hurt. And obviously that's a bummer. That's been a risk over the years with Chris Godwin. But him and Mike Evans are just a great duo there. And it's nice to see that continue. It's really good for Godwin's fantasy value. It's great for Baker Mayfield. The only player that it might hurt a bit is Jalen McMillan, who was in line to see a nice increase in role. However, this locks McMillan in as the number 3 wide receiver in Tampa. So maybe a little bit less bullish on him now, but still should see a lot of work as an outside receiver while Chris Godwin mans the slot. So Chris Godwin back to the Bucs. Christian Kirk was traded by the Jacksonville Jaguars to the Houston Texans for a 7th-round pick. And he's got a year left on his deal. And I think it's a great move for Houston. They made a couple moves I was a bit puzzled by, including trading away their starting left tackle, Laramie Tunsil, to the Commanders. But Christian Kirk is a nice, solid number 2 weapon behind Nico Collins, while Tank Dell is hurt and Stephon Diggs is a free agent. So I think this makes a lot of sense. He's a good slot player, and he can fill that role while Tank Dell is out, and because it looks like Tank Dell is going to miss probably the entire 2025 season, and so a nice weapon here for C.J. Stroud. Another guy that got traded was Deebo Samuel in recent weeks, and he went over to the Washington Commanders, where he'll be the number 2 receiver. I think it's fine. I think it's makes sense for Washington, and they didn't give up a lot to get him. I think he's nearing the end. He's one of those players that relies a lot on his rushing ability and his legs, and he's starting to get up there a little bit in age, showing some signs of wear and tear, had some injury issues last year. So I'm not in on Deebo Samuel. I really haven't been over the past couple seasons because just the type of player he is doesn't exactly fit what I look for in fantasy football. But still has some talent. He can be a quality number 2 player on that team. But I think this is a nice time to sell high on the hype for Deebo Samuel right now, if you're a Dynasty manager, because I just don't know that he still has that high ceiling that he did with the 49ers. Some other wide receiver news, T. Higgins franchise tagged again. Looks like he's staying in Cincinnati, barring some sort of trade or a sign and trade or whatever. Obviously, he's hoping he can get an extension. Don't know if that's going to happen. The Bengals front office has been just bungling everything this offseason. It's been a mess, and so I'm not sure what's going to happen there. I would expect that he stays in the franchise tag. A couple other guys that signed some deals. Josh Palmer signed with the Buffalo Bills, 3-year, $36 million. Darius Slayton re-signed with the Giants on the same contract, 3-year, $36 million. I actually don't mind the Josh Palmer to Buffalo deal. I think he's someone that is a good separator. He gets open. Didn't have great production with the Chargers, and obviously already had a talented quarterback in Justin Herbert, but maybe Josh Allen can unlock something there. They've got Khalil Shakir, who's signed an extension, and it remains to be seen what Amari Cooper has left in the tank, and then what kind of player Keon Coleman will truly be in the NFL. A lot of questions there with that offense. Cooper Kupp is going to be released if there is no trade partner that materializes over the next couple of days. So it looks to be that he's going to be on the open market. It sounds like Denver might be interested. That's the first rumbling that I have seen, which could make a lot of sense for both parties. Hollywood Brown re-signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, 1-year deal worth just under $7 million. Given the recent news involving Xavier Worthy and the domestic violence incident strangulation, we'll see what kind of legal issues come out of that. It doesn't look like charges were filed, so he might not miss time, but still the league does have the ability to suspend a player even without a charge or a conviction in the legal system. So we'll see how that plays out. There's also Rashee Rice, who is still likely to be suspended for a period of time after his legal issues stemming from before last season. So Hollywood Brown might be a nice little buy low target now that he's fully healthy again, and you can probably get him pretty cheap. And the final wide receiver, just wanted a little shout out to Tyler Lockett, who got cut by the Seahawks. So we mentioned earlier how Seattle was reshaping their entire offense. Forgot to mention him, but obviously a big part of that Seattle team for a long time, and he is out the door. I would imagine that his career might be over as well. I just don't know that there's going to be a team that's excited to sign, somebody of his age and, clearly has taken a step back. But we'll see how things shake out. He's probably somebody that if he does end up playing another season or two, will sign in the next few days as opposed to on day one, and get some sort of cheap 1-year veteran, vet minimum type of deal on a contender. So we'll see how that goes. But pour one out for Tyler Lockett, who had a nice long fantasy career, and his time in Seattle is over. Moving on to the tight ends, we're really only 3 players that are worth bringing up so far. And number 1 is Evan Ingram got released by the Jacksonville Jaguars last week, and he's a free agent. He visited Denver on day 1 of free agency, which would make a lot of sense. They're in need of a tight end, and that seems like it could be a good fit. It's a popular landing spot in the draft for guys like Colson Loveland, Tyler Warren. So Evan Ingram obviously could take away that possibility, but still a talented pass catcher, a good receiving weapon at the tight end spot, and he'll find a home somewhere this week. Mike Gesicki, he found a home again. He re-signed with Cincinnati, 3-year, $25 million deal. So a pretty big contract for Gesicki, who stays with the Bengals. He had a nice season, and good for Joe Burrow. I think it's good for the Bengals offense as a whole. Obviously, not great news for Eric All, who is probably going to miss most of the 2025 season as it was. And so I think Mike Gesicki, he just locked himself up as a starter over the next few seasons with a high-powered offense. So another nice, buy low player that even with the extension might not be that expensive if you need a depth option or backup number 2 tight end on your dynasty team. I think Mike Gesicki could be that for you. Another guy that also fits that mold is Zach Ertz, who re-signed with the Washington Commanders on a 1-year deal. It's good news for him. He had a really nice season. This is good for Jaden Daniels. Bad news for Ben Sinnott, of course, who's now going to have to wait another season before he can really make an impact in fantasy football. So that's pretty unfortunate. But Zach Ertz still has a little bit left in the tank. He had a nice season and gets rewarded. So he signs a 1-year deal with the Commanders. All right. I think that's it. That's everybody as far as I have it now. I have not seen any other notable signings. I know Mac Hollins went to the Patriots. Nothing really to talk about there. Kind of just another small-time player. But that's what we got. Let me take a quick look here, see if there's anything else while we've been recording, but doesn't look like it. So we will sign off for this week. We'll be back next week with more. We'll have some more reactions to various free agent signings and everything that happens throughout the rest of this week. And then we're back into rookie stuff. We'll have some rookie rankings. We'll finally do an actual set of official rookie rankings, whether that's next week or the week after. I'm not sure yet. I'm still working on those, trying to iron out kind of where exactly I have some players. But next week could be it. So stay tuned. That's always a big show and very helpful as we start to really get into draft season here with the NFL draft coming up at the end of April. So thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you, especially if you made it this far. You've been listening to the Dynasty War Room podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we will talk to you all next week.